In May 2024, a New York judge sentenced Dexter Taylor to 10 years in prison for gunsmithing in the privacy of his own home. Dexter ordered the parts legally to his home address using his credit card. He never fired any of the firearms. He didn't talk about them online. This was a hobby. Dexter has zero criminal record. He is a great father, a loving son, a true friend, an attentive neighbor, a podcaster, a philosopher, and an engineer. Dexter created a movement called Foundationism, which has brought people together from all over the world. In 2021, he recorded a 10-part series explaining the 10 precepts of Foundationism, which are: see deeply, listen closely, reason honestly, speak clearly, act bravely, deny the self, defend the individual, respect tradition, face the present, cultivate the future. Listen to Dexter and decide for yourself if this excellent man should be in prison for a victimless crime.
My next question for you is, what's wrong with the way that we generally see things now?
One of the things that can be wrong with the way we see things now, and by the way, I'm necessarily talking about individuals. I'm really thinking about as a culture, right?
Yeah.
How can I put this? The Foundationist Society, as you mentioned, is not a revolutionary organization.
Yeah.
But we are radical. We are radical, meaning what? Meaning we're trying to get to the roots of things, right? So, from the Latin word radix, root. So if you're all on the surface of a thing, you're never going to get to the roots of it. Now, what's wrong with the way we are seeing things right now? Well, because the attention economy must, almost by definition, measure attention by looking at surface indicators, that is, our behavior, in order for a company, an online company, a social media company, to measure your attention. They have to look at a measurable indicator, right? Because they can't really read your mind. They're reading your actions, okay? And if you think about it, what you're seeing when you're looking at a screen, you're looking at an article, you're very often looking at a summary, a superficial read of something, a first take on something. Like there's surfaces all over, right, in this game. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, except if we're reaching deep conclusions on the basis of these surface indicators and on the basis of what is on the surface. That's the only problem. It's not that, deciding on something based on a surface indicator is actually a very normal thing. That's another human cognitive superpower. We're the pattern sensing and pattern seeking creatures, okay? And often we have to do that because there's an awful lot of information in the world. We don't have time to process all of it down to the roots, okay? And we have to look at things and kind of make decisions. That's fine. The problem is when we try to reach deep conclusions, and it's almost like we allow this surface perception to trickle all the way down to our fundamental philosophy of things, where it does great damage. One example is identity politics, or so-called identity politics, right? Why is that a problem? Well, again, on the surface, it's not necessarily bad to have a politics based on how one identifies oneself. But the thing is that how deep does that identity go? I mean, I grew up as the son of working class immigrants from the Caribbean, okay? I grew up in a union household. So what is more important? What is more fundamental? What is closer to the roots of my identity? The son of Black people or the son of working class people? And the answer matters very much. Because, I mean, on the one hand, talking about identity politics, I can say, as a Black person, as a Black man, blah, 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 and this and that, okay. Or I could start to see deeply into what my identity actually means. I could maybe start to look at things in ways that cut across different lines. And I could maybe start to understand a little bit more about the history of labor in my country and in the United States and elsewhere and around the world. And I might come to the conclusion that the deeper conclusion, the conclusion based on characteristics other than surface characteristics, that someone like Jeff Bezos is not white. He's a billionaire. So if we get away from surface indicators, we've got a shot at understanding what is happening to us. If we get away from a superficial understanding of history, Black people have been oppressed by so-called white people for, the phrase is often 400 years, right? 400. So that is a superficial understanding of history. Not necessarily that it's wrong. It doesn't go deep enough. Because, of course, then you go back and say, well, wait a minute. Africans have been oppressed and enslaved by Arab Muslims for 1,400 years. And then you go back a bit further and you say, oh, slavery and oppression and marginalization have been the default lot of humankind forever. And then, as you've probably heard me say before, we can go right back to the most ancient religious stories we have. And that is that in the book of Genesis, the first crime after the fall, after the expulsion from paradise, was a fratricide. And when you get down to the roots like that, then all of a sudden you pull back and you look at man's inhumanity to man, and you can all of a sudden acknowledge that racism exists, but that racism is simply one moral error among many. And you don't have to look very far to find human beings being inhumane to each other. We don't do it because we're white or because we're Black or because we're Arab or because we do it because we can, which is maybe the worst reason of all. But I'll pause there. But long story short, identity politics traffics in surface indicators and a superficial understanding of history. And you have to get below that to really get a handle on what is happening to us.